We have enough boxes to move now, even though we don't have a place to move.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's kind of like this has been a year-long journey, right? Because I mean, Ruth died in April, and we're still, kind of going through things, and we have to decide what's going to fit in our new place and our new garage and lifestyle, and what's not going to fit. And that's all a process, just even after, waiting on construction and all this stuff. So
And I don't guess you're putting your house up for sale in Hoover
we will
until,
be eventually.
okay. I mean,
Hope,
until you move.
yeah, until we get
Yeah.
out of there. So yeah, it's a process. Um,
Well,
so I,
I'm,
I've so oh, Angela's online now. I see too. So we're up. So I can probably say we're probably getting a dog, or we're definitely getting a dog.
ah,
Um, so a friend is getting rid of their dog, and we are taking it on. So there's a lot of changes going on.
I cannot understand getting rid of your dog.
Well, they're moving and can't. Oh, Angela says there's someone actually interested in the house who's coming to see it today. So
Oh, wonderful.
yeah, so that's it's who I don't even know what's happening. I'm just going with the flow.
Joe and I paid whopping $3,000 for our first house.
Wow.
We bought it was a real fixer-upper
Hmm.
and spent 2 years in it, sheetrocking and everything while we lived there.
Hmm.
And put it up for sale. We had already started to build a house, but had just barely got the foundation down. Put it up for sale, and it sold the day after we put it up for sale.
Wow, wow,
And we ended up moving in with my mother and father for 6 miserable months.
wow.
Hey,
Wow.
Rob.
Good morning, Rob.
I don't think he's got the sound on.
That's all right.
Hello,
Hey
hello.
there.
Sound working
Hey,
now?
Yeah,
yeah.
gotcha. It's good to see you.
You too.
Is Miller hanging out with us?
No, not today.
So Angela said, so she wrote that her friend is moving across country into an apartment, and her dogs need a
Hmm.
special home. And so we're taking the older one, and another college friend is taking the younger one. So so we're gonna have a dog again, which has been, I don't know, several years.
A
Uh,
house dog or a yard dog?
it's more of a house dog. He's a little guy. So but that'll be different because we haven't had a dog like that before. So um, but I'm actually excited about uh, getting a dog. It's been, like I said, it's been a while. Well, I tell you what, since it's the three of us, and my my voice is not doing great, I'm gonna try to muscle through here. Why don't we do this? How about let me pull up the liturgy real quick. Um, Paula, if you could be the liturgist, and Rob, if you would be voice of the people,
Okay,
and then how about this, Paula, if you'll do the um New Testament, and Rob, if you would do the Old Testament reading. Will that work?
sure thing.
I do the New Testament.
Yeah, Paul, if you do the New Testament.
Okay. Okay.
Um, and then, yeah, I think we're good. I'm gonna go ahead and pull the liturgy up. Um, I'm sorry, it's so when I'm looking on the preview, it's so tiny. I have to make sure it's the liturgy and not the DSM-5, which I've been using this week. So, like that's going to be a weird liturgy. So,
That would be a
uh,
good responsive reading, I'm sure.
yeah, yeah.
Well,
Uh,
I'm right there with Tony today. I'm not sure how to pronounce one of these first words.
okay, so yeah, it's Bodhi Day.
Okay.
And
Today, go
go ahead,
ahead.
go ahead.
December the 8th. Today is Bodhi Day for people in some Buddhist traditions, which marks the day Buddha attained enlightenment around 500 BCE. It is marked by festivals of lamp lighting in the winter dark. Today also marks the feast of the Immaculate Conception in the Roman Catholic Church and Marian traditions. The Immaculate Conception does not refer or refers not to Jesus's miraculous conception, but to his mother Mary's, whose parents were Anne and Joachim. On this day in 1660, a woman first appeared on an English stage for a production of Othello. The actor was likely Margaret Hughes, although some historians believe she was Anne Marshall. Women had previously been banned from acting. Only 2 years later, because of homophobia, the king decreed that women's roles should only be played by women, illustrating both the malleability of cultural norms for sex and gender and the intersectionality of oppression. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Hear these words of invitation.
The hospitality of God knows no bounds.
The love of God is immeasurable.
The generosity of God is beyond our wildest dreams.
We gather today as invited ones,
As beloved ones,
as blessed ones.
draw near and let us break the bread of life.
The responsive reading is from the 25th Psalm. I offer my life to you, Lord. My God, I trust you.
Please don't let me be put to shame. Don't let my enemies rejoice over me.
For that matter, don't let anyone who hopes in you be put to shame.
Instead, let those who are treacherous without excuse be put to shame.
Make your ways known to me, Lord. Teach me your paths.
Lead me in your truth. Teach it to me, because you are the God who saves me.
I put my hope in you all day long.
Lord, remember your compassion and faithful love. They are forever.
But don't remember the sins of my youth or my wrongdoing.
Remember me only according to your faithful love, for the sake of your goodness, Lord.
The Lord is good and does the right thing. He teaches sinners which way they should go.
God guides the weak to justice, teaching them his way.
All the Lord's paths are loving and faithful.
For those who keep his covenant and laws. The Hebrew Bible reading comes from Baruch chapter 5. Take off your mourning clothes and oppression, Jerusalem. Dress yourself in the dignity of God's glory forever. Wrap the justice that comes from God around yourself like a robe. Place the Eternal One's glory on your head like a crown. God will show your brilliance everywhere under heaven. God will give you this name by which to be called forever, the peace that comes from justice, the honor that comes from reverence for God. Get up, Jerusalem. Stand on the high place and look around to the east. See your children gathered from the west to the east by the Holy One's word, as they rejoice that God has remembered them. They went out from you on foot, driven along by their enemies, but God will bring them back to you, carried aloft with glory as on a royal throne. God has ordered every high mountain and the eternal hills to be brought down, and the valleys to be filled in to level the ground, so that Israel may walk safely in God's glory. The woods and every fragrant tree have shaded Israel with God's command. God will lead Israel with gladness by the light that shines forth from his glory, with the mercy and righteousness that come from him.
Luke 3, 1 through 6. In the 15th year of the rule of the Emperor Tiberius, when Pontius Pilate was governor over Judea and Herod was ruler over Galilee, his brother Philip was ruler over Iturea and Trachonitis, and Lysanias was ruler over Abilene during the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas. God's word came to John, son of Zechariah, in the wilderness. John went throughout the region of the Jordan River, calling for people to be baptized to show that they were changing their hearts and lives and wanting God to forgive their sins. This is just as it was written in the scroll of the words of Isaiah the prophet. A voice crying out in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord. Make his path straight. Every valley will be filled, every mountain and hill will be leveled. The crooked will be made straight, and the rough places made smooth. All humanity will see God's salvation. May God bless the hearing of this word.
Thanks be to God.
Gerard Manley Hopkins wrote, all things therefore are charged with love, are charged with God. And if we knew how to touch them, give off sparks and take fire, yield drops and flow, ring and tell of him.
So thank you all for getting us started today in worship. We'll go into a time of prayer. Um, I will begin with the prayer, and those of you, if you're streaming on Facebook or YouTube, if you'd like to lift up a prayer request, you can simply put it in the comments or the chat, and we'll read it while we're praying. Would someone keep an eye on Facebook, and I'll keep an eye on YouTube?
I've got Facebook up.
Okay, thank you. And Paula, can you keep an eye on the Zoom chat also?
I will.
All right. Let's go to God in prayer. Gracious God, as we prepare for the Christmas season this Advent, as we try to prepare our hearts and minds for the arrival of Jesus Christ, we are conscious that our world is in turmoil just as theirs were. We're mindful of the news from Syria, from Ukraine, from Gaza, from South Korea. God, we are so connected these days by a global network of news that we're very much conscious when there is conflict in other parts of the world. And God, when we learn of it, it seems to highlight our own conflict. It seems that we are never at peace. And yet, God, we ask you to make us conscious of the peace that flows into our lives in moments of understanding, in our personal lives. We ask you to help us to be grateful for the peace that appears when we gather with friends, when two people listen to each other's story, when we experience ourselves just being in nature or in human community. God, help us to be mindful of the fact that more of our lives have peace in them than conflict. We ask, God, that you will bring peace to those places where there is strife, but let it be a peace with justice and not a peace of silence. We're mindful of the words of the prophets that we've read this morning, that you are at work leveling inequality. God, we ask you to help us in our individual pursuits of righteousness and discipleship, to let that harmonize with your goals for the world, that you would bring about your kingdom. I invite those of you who have prayer requests to share them in the comments.
Healing for Victoria's husband,
Lord, hear our prayer.
for employment for those who need work,
Lord, hear our prayer.
for Lauren,
Lord, hear our prayer.
For the people of Syria and South Korea,
Lord, hear our prayer.
gratitude for the changing seasons and changing weather,
Lord, hear our prayer.
gratitude for the rain after a long, dry summer,
Lord, hear our prayer. For the strength to handle the struggles of these trying days.
Lord, hear our
Lord,
prayer.
hear our prayer.
For those traveling this weekend, including Angela,
Lord, hear our prayer.
gratitude for places where the feminine influence entering enters the world politics,
Lord, hear our prayer.
for the elderly,
Lord, hear our prayer.
for trans people whose personhood and humanity is being questioned,
Lord, hear our prayer.
For all those looking for sanctuary,
Lord, hear our prayer.
God, for those that we've mentioned and for the prayers of our hearts that we don't know how to put into words, we give you thanks that you hear our prayers. And we join with Jesus Christ in the prayer that he taught us to pray. Holy One, our Mother and Father, let your name be revered. Let your reign come. Let your will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. Give us today the bread we need for today, and forgive our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For yours is the sovereignty, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. So I didn't actually, I don't have any notes for today. I actually felt like I was struggling a little bit with which direction to go. I wanted to share this passage from Baruch, which is from the Apocrypha in the Bible, which is not a part of the Bible that most Protestants read. It didn't make it into the Protestant canon. It's still in the Roman Catholic Bible, but most Protestants don't read some of the things that are in the Apocrypha. A lot of which were written in this what we call the intertestamental time between the Old Testament and the New Testament. About 300 years. So Baruch is one of these books that sounds a lot like Isaiah. So we had two passages today, one from Baruch and one from Luke, where Luke is quoting another passage from Isaiah, right? I just want to point out, like, these are three times in Scripture where we hear this language of leveling mountains and raising valleys. Now, in Isaiah and Baruch, the context is that the people of Jerusalem are going to come back from exile. So they're writing about people who are in the east in Babylon coming back to Jerusalem, and this was a big theme in the prophetic part of the Bible, that God is going to restore Israel from exile. That even though Israel's been exiled and a lot of bad stuff has happened, God's going to restore their fortunes. And kind of miraculously, it did happen. People were allowed to return. Now, the thing is, what they returned to was not the same as what they left. It was different. They returned to a place that was still very much under the domination of Greek and then Roman rule. There was still inequality. So they returned, and there was all this language about things are going to be different. This is going to be like God's going to be in charge of things. Things are going to be really nice. There will be no, by the way, rich and poor anymore. Everyone will have their needs met. And of course, they returned. That part of the prophecy came true, but things still kind of sucked, right? And so you would have this occasionally call back to this prophetic language in Isaiah, or sometimes other prophetic passages, like everyone will sit under their own vine and their own fig tree. They will be at peace and unafraid. No one will make them afraid anymore. And we in the modern world read these prophetic passages, and I think sometimes in the church we've heard them so much, we just kind of gloss right over them. But I mean, think about this, right? And this wasn't in our scripture, but today, but it's in the Bible. Everyone will sit under their own vine and their own fig tree, and no one will make them afraid anymore. In other words, they're going to have everything they need. Like every individual is going to have everything they need for survival, for a good life. A fig tree, fruit, and a vine for wine, right? And everyone's going to have their own, if I were going to be radical, I would say means of production, right? Everyone's going to have their own means of production, and things are going to be great. Like, this was the vision of the kingdom of what God wanted. By the way, this language of like digging down mountains and filling in valleys, this kind of project of road building, the metaphor, of course, was that people were going to be coming from Babylon back to Jerusalem, and the idea is God's going to make it easy for them to get home, right? God's gonna make it this easy. God's gonna shade them with trees and make the path really straight, and they're all going to be able to get home. So the idea was, not only is God's kingdom coming, but God's going to make it easy for them to get there, right? But then later on, when Baruch and John are quoting this language about leveling the mountains and raising the valleys, I want to point out this was no longer just God's going to make it easy for us to get back. There's not a road anymore. We're not talking about roads. When they're talking about raising valleys and lowering mountains, that's metaphor. That's about inequality, right? I mean, the idea is for us to get to this place, this kingdom where God's reign is going to be present, that we're going to level the uneven ground. That's pretty explicit metaphor. This is about economic and social equality. God's going to level the playing field, right? And the idea, when John goes out and John's calling people to come be baptized, Luke goes on to say it was all kinds of people. It was rich people, it was poor people, it was the priests, there were tax collectors there. I mean, the whole idea is, yes, diverse people are coming out to listen to John, and kind of in that group, John's talking about leveling the mountains and raising the valleys, right? This is supposed to be a big social movement. And I just, this week has made me mindful about that ancient call, that prophetic call, what the prophets are really talking about. Now, people may not necessarily believe me when I'm talking about this stuff. They might say that's not what that means. That means something different. And that would be fine. I would be really interested to hear what that might mean besides radical social upheaval and social leveling. But I'm especially mindful because this is Christmas. And we just went through an election. And we have a president who is putting billionaires in charge of government. And also this week, a healthcare CEO was murdered in New York in broad daylight, in cold blood, premeditated murder. And in the week since, there have been a lot of people who have shared stories of basically glee, why they're delighted that this guy got killed. And it's made me reflect on nonviolence, on the gospel, on these prophetic calls during Christmas for a leveled playing field, for a kind of radical leveling of radical inequality. I shared a post on social media earlier today because this has just been on my mind so much. Charles Dickens often gets brought out during the Christmas season. We talk about A Christmas Carol, the story of Scrooge. So I often will talk about A Christmas Carol at some point during Advent, just because it's on TV. You can watch A Christmas Carol. My favorite version of Christmas Carol, by the way, is A Muppet Christmas Carol, which Michael Caine is the star in that. And I love that more people seem to be aware of this, maybe because of the internet. But Michael Caine is playing with the Muppets, and he plays it straight. I mean, he actually does a really good job being Scrooge, while around him the other characters are Muppets. I think in so many ways how very Dickensian that is. But A Christmas Carol is about this rich guy, Scrooge, who doesn't really seem to enjoy his wealth, but he hoards it, and he has a lot of contempt for the poor. And it's kind of a surprising Christmas story. Uh, Scrooge is visited by three ghosts: the ghost of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas present, and the ghost of Christmas future. And all of them are really intended to kind of operate on Scrooge's heart. The ghosts are trying to help Scrooge change his character because, and there's kind of an evangelical urgency to this. You're going to die, Scrooge. And when you die, you may wind up like your partner, Jacob Marley, with these heavy chains of that are forged to hang around his neck. I mean, the idea is he's having a vision of hell. This is kind of like Dante's Divine Comedy. Scrooge is the idea is we're going to use the carrot and stick. We're going to show you the mistakes you've made, kind of what we're going to show you the present, kind of what your current greed is doing to the world, and then we're going to show you the future in which you die and no one mourns your death. And that's really the terrifying part in A Christmas Carol. Usually in plays or in movies, the ghost of Christmas future looks like the Grim Reaper, comes in as death, and is really terrifying. And when Scrooge is brought to the future and he sees, the ghost of Christmas future doesn't tell him this is actually his death. He's led to kind of guess that, right? The thieves are kind of dividing up Scrooge's stuff. One of my famous lines is one of the thieves is handing someone his blanket from his bed. The kind of head thief says, "I don't pay extra for the warmth," because the idea was like she had taken the bed sheet while Scrooge was still dying, right? I mean, the idea is like his death is so celebrated, right? That the division of his plunder. And by the way, this is also very equal in New Testament, right? You can't take it with you. I've heard people talk, preachers say, "I've never seen a hearse pulling a U-Haul," right? The idea that you're not going to the grave with possessions. So the riches that you accumulate better be intangible. This is very New Testament, very gospel related, right? So Charles Dickens is writing with this evangelical urgency. Like Scrooge, you need to change. You need to change your heart. Because there's people who are not going to mourn your death unless you change your ways. Dickens also wrote A Tale of Two Cities, which is about the French Revolution. And as I was listening to people or reading people's comments with glee over the execution or the assassination of this healthcare executive, I kept thinking about the women who were knitting beside the guillotine in A Tale of Two Cities, who were cracking jokes as the aristocrats came to the guillotine and had their heads cut off, right? Like this is a scene, this is part of legendary French history. They were called the tricoteuses, right? These knitting women who were kind of the social commentary. They were kind of like the jesters to the king, only they were killing the kings. Dickens had a real understanding of kind of one of two ways things could go. Either violent revolution with people, and I think Dickens had a sense that poverty causes trauma, and that these women who were knitting besides the guillotine, they were traumatized. But part of the effect of trauma is it disconnects you from your common humanity with other people, right? And I think Dickens saw that as tragic. That happens a lot in Dickens novels. It happens in Great Expectations, Oliver Twist, right? He writes about poverty because he was seeing massive social inequality in industrial England, right? So I don't want this just to be a history and literature lesson, but I really feel like Dickens was a Christian. And he really believed that people's hearts needed to change. And if people's hearts didn't change, that bad crap was going to happen. Like either socially, like the French Revolution, or in Scrooge's case, it's just bad for your soul. You know, like you got a chance to turn things around. You need to turn things around. I think Dickens also had a sense if we don't turn things around collectively, it's going to look like the French Revolution. He was writing at the same time as Karl Marx, who was also talking about class struggle and oppression. Dickens had his finger on the pulse of what was going on in English industrial society, which is that poor people are traumatized by their poverty. And so even though I think, when I'm reading comments about the murder of a CEO, and people are sharing their personal stories about being denied coverage. And I'll tell you, this kind of resonates with me. Because part of what radicalized me, what made me a feminist, was engaging with health insurance companies over my wife's health. Being and this was in the 1990s after a surgery for exploratory surgery because of uterine fibroids. We were declined on some of our health insurance, not for the surgery, but for the anesthesia portion of the surgery. Because the insurance company they had a doctor's report from the surgeon, but not from the anesthesiologist. Like you would ever have surgery, this kind of surgery without anesthesia, right? And so likewise, the same week that we heard news from Anthem Health Insurance Agency that said they weren't going to cover anesthesia that went beyond what they determined was the length of a surgery needed to go. Right? That struck a chord with me. And I understand the rage. Because I've felt, and my wife can vouch for you, I was so angry. I understood terrorism. Like I understood why someone would do what this murderer did. I was so furious. Now I'm a pastor. I'm committed to nonviolence. I would say that's largely, sometimes that's spiritual nonviolence. It's a spiritual commitment. Sometimes it's strategic commitment. It just depends on the day. I will admit that I'm not terribly consistent in my application of these moral principles, but I am generally committed to nonviolence, right? But part of that's because I understand that if we do not understand the gospel commitment to leveling the playing field, then nonviolence is not going to work. Like, I think the business of the church is to proclaim leveling the mountains, raising the valleys and lowering the mountains, and to have a deep understanding of the fury that might be unleashed if we're not committed to that. That it can't just be thou shalt not kill, right? It also needs to be thou shalt not kill to the powers and principalities that are killing people every day. We have the worst outcomes, and we pay the most for healthcare of any industrialized nation, largely because health insurance companies exploit the sick. And in the Methodist Church, we have social principles, one of which is a commitment to universal healthcare that nobody talks about, right? That no churches talk about because that gets into politics. It's in our social principles. It is a basic commitment to human dignity, that the care we show to people should not be dependent on the money they have. I realize I'm preaching to the choir, that you guys who are listening to me already believe this. But I think it is super important for us to acknowledge that this is part of our faith, that this is not just some airy-fairy stuff. This isn't just politics. This isn't Marxism. This is a commitment to the prophetic proclamation of the kingdom of God that John the Baptist and Jesus were talking about. I'm also mindful of when Jesus was being led away to the cross. one of the things he cried out to the crowd was, if this is what they do when the wood is green, what will they do when the wood is dry? And most interpreters understand that to mean he's making a reference to people who called themselves the firebrands, dry wood. Like that was the term. They called themselves dry wood. We are the ones who are going to start the fire that's going to bring down the Roman government. And Jesus is saying, look, guys, I'm the green wood. This is what they're doing to me. What are they going to do to y'all if y'all go in there with violence, right? I mean, this is strategic nonviolence Jesus is preaching here, by the way. The church has no sense that that is who we represent or that that's what we're called to do. But I believe sincerely, for those of us who think of ourselves as the church, we got to be talking about this stuff. The prophetic call to level mountains and raise valleys is not about landscaping. It's not about road building. It's about society. That we have to be talking about of mitigating this rampant inequality. We've got to be talking about social and economic equality. That is part of our faith. And it is as integral, it is as much a part of our faith as a commitment to nonviolence. Like these things don't go without each other. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. That's what I got today for you. I didn't make notes because this has just been swirling in my head and I felt like I needed to get it out. So I'd love to hear your responses or your feedback.
As far as the Methodist Church's approach, at my last appointment, which was a rather large church, and I got paid more than I ever expected to as a pastor. I was told by the DS, go.
Oh,
he was my boss. If this, did I just freeze? Did I freeze up?
You froze. So you
Hello?
said you were told by your
Okay.
DS, and then I lost you.
Who is my boss? If you're not Methodist and don't know what a DS is,
Right.
not to post anything controversial on Facebook. And not to preach controversial sermons because we might lose church members.
Right.
Now, how do you preach the gospel without hitting controversial areas, especially in a very comfortably upper middle class neighborhood?
Right? Yes.
And I felt like he was totally tying my hands and feet together and I couldn't do anything. Camille has made Camille must really like Charles Dickens. I'm going to start and read a lot of hers.
Oh, fine. Go for it.
Okay. I think George Washington even used that quote of sitting under your own and vine and fig tree in a letter to the first Hebrew community in the United States.
Oh, that's interesting. I would love to look that up. If you have a reference, I would love to see that.
I think that certainly was used in Hamilton as well. There were lyrics about that.
Yeah.
It may have been taken from its original context, but it was used. Yeah.
That's cool. I don't remember that, but I'm thank you for bringing that up.
Camille goes on to say one of Dickens' greatest quotes is, "No one is useless in this world who lightens the burdens of another." Dickens was sent to work in a shoe blackening factory when he was a child because his father was sent to debtor's prison. He had firsthand experience with the effects of poverty. And after the release of a Christmas charitable charitable giving increased. And it is so obvious that when people have enough to eat and their families are taken care of, there aren't revolts and revolutions in those countries. Where it happens is when the people in poverty feel like they're being tortured. It's so bad. And I know self-interest is not a good motivation, but for our own self-interest, it's smart to take care of people.
Yes. Absolutely. Well, I mean, we saw that during the pandemic, right? I mean, what we don't do for our brother or sister comes back on us, right? I mean, I'm thinking that's kind of like that. This is Dickens's perspective. I mean, I think Dickens had a really good sense of that. Um, I also want to say, Paula, I think one of the challenges for us too is that um, we always have to talk in terms of relative poverty because a lot of times people, you know, we are extremely big quotes around we are extremely wealthy in the United
Yes,
States, even though we have 600 some odd thousand homeless, unhoused individuals, right? And a lot of times you'll hear people say, "Oh, even people on, food stamps have televisions as though that's a luxury," right? So much of it has to do, it's relative poverty because it's based on how much we can participate in society, how much life is a struggle. Like if you don't have a television, you're not able to get important news. If you don't have a cell phone, like that used to be one thing I would hear people say, these people are poor, but they have iPhones. You have to, in order to function in this society, to be an equal participant, you need to have a cell phone. Like if you don't, if you're unconnected, like you'll miss job opportunities if you don't have internet access. So, so it really is about relative poverty. And again, that's part of the thing with health insurance is that's the thing that makes us aware of how fragile our existence is when you can be bankrupted or rendered unhoused because you can't afford a medical procedure. It's like you can die or you can do this. That's the anxiety, the existential fear that people live with. And I think that's why health insurance specifically sparks such heated debate. Um,
well,
anyway, but go ahead.
we've had that health insurance experience when I was pregnant with Joanna and went into the hospital to have her. I had some serious complications. She was
Mm,
fine. Our health insurance would pay for 2 days for a healthy baby to stay in the hospital, but I had to stay in the hospital a week.
mhm.
And they would not pay for those 5 other days she was in the hospital nursery. And like I said earlier, Joe and I had paid a whopping $3,000 for our first house. So that hurt. We were
Yeah,
able to get through it, but we were in better shape than most people. And relative poverty thing, only 10% of people in the entire world own their own home.
yeah.
10%, 90% are renting or don't have a home at all or are crashing on somebody's couch.
Hmm.
And we had an up close with it a week ago Saturday when Joanna was coming over to eat after the market at Pepper Place. And she called and said she was bringing somebody with her. And Trevor's best friend from high school had kind of disappeared for a long time. We didn't know what had happened to him. And she had seen him walking down the road and picked him up, and he was homeless.
Mm,
Uh, it was obvious if you knew the symptoms of schizophrenia that he was schizophrenic. His face had no expression on it, no matter.
mhm.
It was blank. Shoot, I'm freezing again, aren't I?
You did.
But yeah, she brought him here to eat, and just realizing this guy grew up in a great middle class family, was
Mhm.
got a good education, and still ended up homeless because of something he couldn't help, had
Right.
no control over it. And
Hmm.
yet we have no sympathy for those people on the street.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you
and
for sharing that.
Camille's at it again. uh let's see where oh, she's got the link to George Washington's letter, and then
Yeah.
she
Thank you for
said
that.
Dr. Andrew Duxbury has been talking about the aging boomer population and how it will strain the health system. will
Yeah.
probably drive many business.
So I want to go ahead. So thank you for that. I want to just tag on the being unhoused also goes right directly to everyone having their own vine and fig tree. Which, as you said, like the 10% figure is a far cry from the kingdom of God, where everyone had this. That's housing. That's stability. Rob, you've had your hand up for a minute. Go ahead.
Oh man, okay, so many thoughts, so much to tie together here.
Yeah.
So I wanna start that. Okay, now I'm getting a warning that my internet connection is unstable, so you'll
Yeah.
have to warn me if bad things are happening. That charge to not preach anything controversial. What strikes me about that is the use of the word controversial.
Mhm.
I'm not coming through, am I? There's a lot of
Yeah, you
lag.
said what
Yeah,
strikes me
you
about that
are.
is that the use of the word controversial. Yeah.
Andy's gone.
Ugh, shucks. You are. Yeah, it's
Can you
freezing.
hear me?
Yes.
It's
Can
choppy,
you
but
hear
you're
me?
coming through.
Yes. Speak, for your servant is listening.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. All right, I think we're doing better. The use of that word controversial, what strikes me is what that enables us to smuggle through, right?
Mhm.
Because the priors of that word suggest that there is legitimate debate, that there are matters of opinion, and we don't want to, you know, like get into that, right?
Mhm.
And the reality is that's completely inappropriate for that context
Yeah.
because the stuff should not be controversial. What your DS actually said was don't tell them what they need to hear because they won't like it.
Yeah. Yes.
And so now I want to connect that to where that comes from. I was reading recently, and I mean this has come up before. This isn't like a new revelation. It's just relevant, right? That in these translations that we read of biblical texts, we keep using this word righteousness.
Hmm.
And in our modern hearing, it's a synonym with rectitude, I'm
Hmm.
afraid.
Yes.
And but of course, when you go back to the original languages, this word means justice, the way we use that word now.
Hmm.
And so if we just threw out the word righteousness and only used the word justice, this
Hmm.
stuff would hit differently.
Totally.
And it would hold together these concerns that our focus on rectitude and not being controversial has enabled us to pry apart, right?
Hmm.
In order to keep benefiting from an unjust system.
Hmm.
So I love your focus on Dickens today, because Dickens understood this.
Hmm. Yes.
I mean that Marley line, "I wear the chains I forged in life," right?
Yeah.
Um, so you talked about being committed to nonviolence, and so I'm not here to excuse the assassination of someone.
Right.
I will only pause to notice that this society does have a great affection for the myth of redemptive violence,
Hmm.
and those chickens come home to roost.
They absolutely do.
And I think what's really interesting, what's really impactful in this historical moment, if I think about this episode being a little highlighted sidebar box in a social studies textbook of the future, right? And that's kind of the critical distance I'm trying to take. And just imagine, what does this mean? How does this really hit, right? Like, we are living in the future that Scrooge was warned of.
Yeah.
And the assassinated CEO was Scrooge.
Yes.
He literally led an enterprise that profited grossly from human misery.
Hmm.
Um, so granted, we live in this capitalist system, and the underlying claim of that system is that you should be able to make, a reasonable profit by adding value to society. Okay, fine. So if you're going to be a for-profit insurance company, and that's just how we've organized the system, and I know we can definitely do better, and we can all talk about that, but just granting that it is the way it is, fine. You should not be making gigantic profits in this industry if you're actually meeting the function that the market has allocated to you in society.
Yeah.
Right? You are not a luxury good. Like if you want to profit handsomely, do luxury goods. If you
Yes.
want to be a good person and feel like you've done something good for society, and our system says you have to make a profit to do that, fine. Then you should be running your health insurance company, turning a 5% profit or whatever. I don't have a good number off the top of my head, but like what they were rolling in, 80% of it, 90% of it should have been paid out in claims.
Yes.
And the much smaller remainder could have been profit, right?
Yes.
But no. And I love the fact that in A Christmas Carol, Dickens gives us the hook on the health issue because of Tiny Tim.
Yes. Thank you
Like,
for that.
I'm sorry, this man who has been assassinated is literally Scrooge.
Yeah.
And we are living in the future that Scrooge was warned of, where I mean, God forbid that I live a life that I die or am killed and people are laughing and mocking and rejoicing because I deserved it.
Yeah.
God forbid.
Mm-hmm.
That's the story we're living in right now. That's what we're witnessing. The intersection of that kind of pathological focus on wealth at whatever cost intersected with redemptive violence.
100%.
So my last thought on this is it's making me think about the novel that Ursula Le Guin wrote, The Dispossessed, where there is a group of people who sort of self-exiled, there's maybe some ambiguity on that, to a moon, and they live there as anarchists and socialists. And their society functions, and we get to see how it works, and it's normal for them, and they like it. It's not all perfect. There's a brilliant physicist from their planet who visits their original homeworld, right? So he's from Anaris. He visits Uras, which is a much wealthier capitalist world with it's very cosmopolitan, it's urban, and it has gross inequality, right? And it has some oppression. It has its own flavors of oppression that are maybe different from the flavors of oppression that surface on Anaris, right? And that novel, and just how it opens up, like nothing has to be sainted, nothing has to be perfect. These societies are allowed to be what they are, and we see them clearly, we see them honestly. There's a lot of good stuff on Uras. It's also horrifying. And honestly, the thing that Miller and I say to each other so often, is we live in Uras. That is our society.
Yeah.
And we have to reckon with that. So I recommend the book.
I need to read that book. That sounds like one I haven't read enough Ursula K. Le Guin, actually, because I've heard about her writing. I sounds like I need to read, but thank you for that. I think you're right. I mean, as you said, I think what you said captures it perfectly, that as the intersection between, capitalism and the myth of redemptive violence brings us to this place. And it's like, well, if you don't like it, you need to change something. That's my feeling.
Right? I have to add, because this just dawned on me, as we think about, and again, I'm not saying this is the best way that we should have organized our society, just taking it as it is. There's a precedent for industries that operate on relatively thin margins and don't make huge profits and meet crucial human needs. Grocery stores.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, right on.
Now,
absolutely.
Consolidation in that industry has been trying to eke out higher profits, and at some cost to the workers and bad things. Like, we're getting it wrong again. But, I'm just saying that, like, we do know how that functions. Like, this is an ethical problem, at its heart. Like quite apart from our ability to improve the way we provide core needs in our society, this need not have happened.
Right.
This need not have happened, except that people are in an industry that should not be making people rich because it is meeting crucial human needs. And instead, they are using it to increase human suffering so they can get rich. They are directly profiting from people's death and suffering. Like,
100%.
oh,
Yeah.
and hopefully this episode maybe helps some of them see that.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah. Grocery stores. I like that. I like your read on that. Oh, Paula, go ahead. You had your hand up.
Several comments on
Okay.
YouTube. Alim says, as you describe the French Revolution, how people were so traumatized that they lost their sense of morality. This explains the MAGA faithful.
Hmm.
These working class who will forsake their sense of morality and support such an amoral being as 45. I think so much of these scriptures are talking about the journey to inner peace. People who live in inner peace do not need to exploit others.
Mm.
Camille
I'm gonna
said,
pause. I'm gonna pause right there because
okay,
I think that's so true, Aleem, and that's part of like I think. I mean, I really, I mean, I think Dickens was an optimist. Like he believed Scrooge could change, and I mean, and part of it was, I mean, I've seen a lot of memes, people saying like, yeah, but it takes supernatural intervention by ghosts threatening them with death, but I do think I think Dickens was an optimist. Like he, and I get that from other of his writings too. Like some of his, you know, he shows so often wealthy people who are miserable, right? Like that's a theme in Oliver Twist and Great Expectations too. Like this wealth hasn't helped you do any. I mean, this isn't getting you what you want. Um, and I feel like that's part of what he's after is like for the if I when I'm at my most Christian and Buddhist kindness to people who are oppressors, I think if they had what they needed, they wouldn't be that way. You know, like if someone wrote about Trump, he's never had love he didn't have to buy. I don't, which I think is such a poignant way of putting it. Um, I think I'll stop there. I feel like there's so much of that there's a hope in if human beings had what they needed, they wouldn't be that way. But anyway, okay. Sorry, Paula. Go ahead.
You,
okay,
oh, sorry.
Oh,
Camille. Well, I'll shut up and let you talk, but let me get
I'll
back
I'll
to
read
Camille and Aline.
I'll read Camille's in just a second.
all right.
You used the phrase earlier, I think, contempt for poverty.
Hmm.
And I'm just thinking to myself, how much of this grasping and need for outrageous wealth, right?
Hmm.
Or even just the crazy naive hope for outrageous wealth, right? That adage about Americans are all just temporarily embarrassed
Yeah.
millionaires,
Yeah.
right? I'm just thinking about contempt for poverty as the foundation of that.
Mm-hmm.
That we are frantically running from the specter of our own poverty,
Hmm.
trying to increase our distance from it, trying to stay ahead of it, right?
Hmm.
Um, because we quail to confront it.
Hmm.
And I think the idea that we would ever just have enough and that we could all have enough for whatever
Hmm.
reason is terrifying to
Hmm.
people. Camille says in the musical version of A Christmas Carol, there's a scene of one of Scrooge's debtors who dances on his coffin singing, "Thank you very much" for dying. Sounds like the glee in the social networks at the death of the CEO.
Yeah.
You missed a couple.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Camille first says, does not talking about controversial social issues tie back into the stories going around that the Beatitudes have been seen as woke? Oh,
Hmm.
yes.
Yeah.
Aline says, I saw a post about a preacher being told by practitioners that the Beatitudes are leftist and impractical in the modern world. People don't believe Christianity can work today.
Hmm. Hmm.
Camille wrote, one of my favorite movies is The Man Who Invented Christmas, and we just watched it last night. It's the story of the background of A Christmas Carol. Yes,
Yeah.
I have seen it. It is a good movie.
I need to look that
And,
one up.
huh?
I need to look that up. Yeah.
I think this goes back to the rectitude issue, right? Like
Hmm.
people don't want this from Christianity. Uh, they just want to be told that they can get the stamp on their hand that will give them access to the afterlife party.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, and so there's no synergy between what we think about eternity and what we think about life now.
Yes. No, I think that's you're exactly right. Like theologically, that's what we've managed to do. And I think it's interesting because Marx and other people, um, I mean, part of their contempt for the church, is the church, the church talks a good game, but doesn't actually do stuff, that the church is full of hypocrites or yada, yada, doesn't, you got, Joel Osteen not opening a sanctuary for the homeless people during the winter or whatever. By the way, side note, most sanctuaries, like I've never liked that. Like having run homeless ministries out of a church, you don't just open up a building and let people in, right? Like that's irresponsible, especially if you don't have showers and feeding places, et cetera, et cetera. Like people have just moronic ideas about what the church should do in that respect. But putting all that aside, it's still like the idea is what are you doing temporarily? Like talking about these eternal values, but not doing anything for people's physical bodies. And I think you're exactly right, Rob, because that's part of our own fault in that we've managed to separate them and let those things be separate. The idea is if you have these eternal values, there's an urgency to like getting it right now with people's bodies and their physical needs, like food, shelter, healthcare. That's so much of what Jesus was talking about. Um, and that's not metaphor. That's like real stuff. Um, yeah, yeah. Paula, you still have your hand up. Do you have something else you wanted to?
Oh,
Whoops.
I just forgot to lower it.
Oh,
Sorry.
no worries.
Kind of in that vein, Dave. I mean, so you're talking about like the whole opening the sanctuaries thing or whatever, and
Mhm.
it does occur to me like, the if the church troubles ourselves to say, hey, society should look different.
Mhm.
Um, what comes back from certain quarters, right, is, well, if that's what you think, you should be doing it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of just a whataboutism, right? That is saying it's illegitimate to talk about society at all. That
Mhm.
society is just some found thing that we're not in control of, and just,
Right.
and that we really need to like directly attack the
Mhm.
legitimacy of that, because that is so wrong, right?
Mhm.
Society at large, the government, the resources and the values that we
All
have
of
the capacity to marshal together are
them.
so much greater than what the church down the street can do.
Mhm.
Now, at the same time, the church down the street doesn't do itself any favors. Like I've been seeing some of these memes going around, about the gigantic like Broadway scale Christmas productions with smoke machines and menageries and everything. It's like
Mhm.
giant mega churches in Texas or wherever. Um, that's Ursula Le Guin could write another novel,
Oh yeah.
if she were alive, about like yeah, I don't even know where to start, but we don't do ourselves any favors.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
are a few larger churches, and they are few and far between,
Mhm.
that have done things like bought large trailers with showers in them or washing
Yeah.
machines and dryers so
Mhm.
that the homeless people can come there and get cleaned up.
Mhm.
They're still not opening their doors, which I think is a wise thing. Even the church that I grew up in has its doors locked 24 hours a day, and you have to have a code to get in, except on
Right.
Sundays and
Right.
Wednesdays, because they've been broken into so many times. And sound systems apparently are really hot items when it
Yeah.
comes to stealing from churches.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because even and we're a little over time, but I wanted to just say I think it's interesting. I think Dickens does a great job in his writings too of showing the role of the church. Like the church is trying, but it's often missing. And and I mean, even in A Christmas Carol, right? You've got the guys going around collecting for the poor, right? And uh, it just it's I think it's interesting. I mean, because I'm part of the church. I mean, we are the church. Um, but it is, I guess it's sort of a microcosm of the bigger picture, which is we are part of what we are trying to change. And I think that is like so much the heart of the spiritual discipline of Christmas. Like I am part of this mess, which means that I'm part of the solution. I'm part of the problem, but I'm also part of the solution. And I have to take that seriously. And I think that's part of the message of the church is like we need to be saying that. This is the controversial stuff we need to be saying is we are part of the problem, which also means we're part of the solution. And that seems like too neat a bow for me to wrap up this today's conversation, but I feel like it's a good place to end. So thank you all for your tolerance on that. I'm going to pull up the liturgy and we can finish out today.
The kingdom is not only beyond our efforts, it is even beyond our vision. We accomplish in our lifetime only a fraction of the magnificent enterprise that is God's work. Nothing we do is complete, which is another way of saying that the kingdom always lies beyond us. We cannot do everything, and there is a sense of liberation in realizing that. We may never see the end results, but that is the difference between the master builder and the worker. We are workers, not master builders, ministers, not messiahs. We are prophets of a future not our own. Amen.
God is love. Nothing is wasted. All things shall be well. Go in peace.
So thank you all for being with us today. Thanks for those of you who've tuned in on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks also to everyone who contributes to the conversation. We appreciate your input as we wrestle with these 2,000, 3,000-year-old scriptures and what they mean for us today. I'm going to go ahead and stop the stream. If you're on Zoom, you can stick around for a minute more.